Cage. Today, I am here with the scenic designer for the Golden Cage, the movie, and also the stage show, Tyler R. Herald. And we are going to get to look at, we're going to get to find out what else you're doing right now. We're going to get to find out, what you went through to create the scenic design for the Golden Cage, and even get to see some of the designs that you created for the Golden Cage.
Mm-hmm.
So I would love to talk to you about, let's just start there. And then I always also want to find out what else you're doing right now and what's important to you in your life and what else you're working on. Um,
100.
when you did the Golden Cage, this was right at the end of the pandemic, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. And when you first saw the script, what was your how did we even bring you into the project?
Sure. Well, I think it's important for folks to understand that the Golden Cage was part of a larger festival of various shows. So I was one designer out of two that handled the all of the productions, across the scope. And I was so lucky to be selected for the Golden Cage. My friend Rebecca directed it. We'd worked together before, so it seemed like a really good fit for us to work together again and create something really exciting.
Yeah, I was really happy that when I started working with Rebecca, that it wasn't just Rebecca. You came along, and the costume designer came along, and that was really exciting. It's like when I played jazz, if you can work with a rhythm section that already works together, you're getting so much more than just bringing individuals in, because you have the background of working with people.
Sure. Yeah, and I think meeting people is always really exciting and awesome too. But you definitely do develop kind of a shared language or dialogue or a way of communicating with one another the more that you work together, which I think just becomes really evident in the process as well. It's easy to just say I'm not sure about that, and no harm, no foul or anything like that, and it just really makes for a really fruitful process.
Yeah, and that was especially interesting here in the Golden Cage, because it was in the middle. There was a lot of change. Like when we first were going to do the show, we were going to have two levels. It was going to be a completely different stage, and then in the middle of the process, it got it all shifted, and it was a single, just very, very simple stage, which ended up being so powerful. It's hard for me to imagine that it could have been more powerful if we'd had two levels.
Hmm. Yeah, I definitely think that, we made the right decision for us. A lot of that was really budget driven, but I think also just like, there was a point in the process as we were getting closer to that where I started to kind of have a sense of like, I wonder if the two level space is too big for this space, and being a scenic designer, you have to be really sensitive to space. And I once we got into the full production process and we did the thing, I was, super relieved and glad that we listened to that and we went with that, because I think it would have been true. I think where we landed was exactly where we needed to for where we were at in the process and the space and everything. And it was just really exciting to go forward with that.
That's great. So we are doing this live, and so if you are there, we've got a hello from somebody. If you've seen the Golden Cage, and then you have seen the scenic design that Tyler created. And if you haven't seen the Golden Cage, go to goldencagemusical.com and you'll see some pictures there. And then you can actually get a link to watch the show as well. So I would love, Tyler, to see some of your early designs, because I was fascinated by how you and Rebecca and Evan, the costume designer, all brought in your initial concepts that you then everybody looked at, and then you built your set from that.
Hmm.
Would you be willing to show some of that and talk about it, and talk about what you were looking for and what you were thinking about, and or actually even before you do that, what made you interested in this particular show?
For sure. Well, I mean, there's so much to talk about with the Golden Cage. I really love opera, so it's something that felt kind of operatic. Was always very intriguing to me. It's a fairy tale, so it's one of those shows where nothing is real and everything is real. It's and so like you really just get to, make all the rules. There are rules, but there aren't rules. And so kind of diving into a world like that was, of course, really exciting.
Yeah, I want to say something also about what you ended up creating, and we'll see it in a few minutes. But um, as I got to watch the film of this over and over again, and I got to see how the set was being used, it was so powerful to me because the two characters see this cage completely differently.
Mhm.
Althea on the inside sees it as made of, granite and iron, or cement and iron, that she can't get out of it is granite and iron. And then Boris sees it as this amazing gold and spectacular thing. But then there's our eyes, and we see it as these feathers.
Mhm.
And that was so, I mean, it was, the set was always beautiful, but there was one moment after seeing the show several times when I was just struck that how we get to have the same experience as them, that it looks completely different to us. It doesn't look, you didn't try to make it like, oh, it looks like her. We don't see what it looks like to her specifically. We don't see what it looks like specifically to him. We see what it looks like to us.
Mhm.
And therefore we have a similar experience to
Yeah,
what each of them has.
yeah, I mean, and there's a lot to even unpack just in that, statement because, you know, uh the whole kind of idea is that, there's a cage, but there isn't a cage, and it's in a cage with your mind. So there's, a lot that we were playing with there where we didn't feel like we needed to make a literal cage because, there's so much that needs to happen. Like the bars get, pulled away and everything, falls away. So it needed to be kind of abstracted and malleable. It didn't need to be like a super literal cage. But then, of course, there's the way, Boris sees it versus Althea sees it, and finding some way to kind of create a representation of a cage without there being a cage. The feathers were something that were light and airy and magical, just like the world, something that Althea could easily have just walked through, right? If she really wanted to. But yeah, they all kind of course, like with the bird imagery and stuff too. It's hard to not mention, playing with that kind of stuff as well.
And it was so magical that it was white feathers, because they also looked like bones in a
Mm.
sense. And when she says her last line, you build your cage from dreams that died, and every heartache that you ever held inside, you forge the bars from every pain and sorrow you've known. And in your cage, you are alone. And that moment, she hands a feather over to Boris,
Mhm.
and that's what makes contact. And finally the contact is made.
For sure. And I think that's a, really wonderful example too of how, storytelling, like the story and the staging and the design can really work hand in hand to create a world and tell a story in a really effective way. Rather than one just trying to do it all, it's kind of the great thing about what we do as collaborative artists.
Yeah, and it was so beautiful for me to be like, in a sense, hands off. I don't know anything about the set, although I did try to, I was like, but everybody, I've got this thing. And you were like, thank you. No,
We
thank
did use
you.
some of your stuff, which was kind of fun.
Well, yeah, you did. That's true.
Yeah, yeah. It's kind of fun when you can get those personal touches in there once in a while.
Right. That's right.
Yep.
So let's look at your, what you created, and how did you create this? How, yeah, let show us, and then let us know how you created it. Like
Sure.
just technically.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So
Do you see
here, yeah,
this?
I'm putting it up. And so this was the first thing that I saw. Now, where did you get these images?
Sure. So, as part of the process, these images were created several weeks after we started the process.
Mhm.
Typically, I try to just listen, as well as kind of talk about the piece at, at the very beginning. And then there's this kind of like research and kind of rumination phase, and then of course like pulling images based on the conversations and stuff that we were having. And so, yeah, all of these images were just taken from online, from various sources, kind of representing some thoughts I was having and some thoughts that, everyone else was contributing to as well. Um, I think it was Evan actually who was talking about mechanics of flight in the beginning when he was talking about like flight suits and stuff like that, as a way to kind of envision the costumes for these characters. So that really kind of started me on a rabbit hole of thinking just about that as well. And so these images are all more conceptual, but like rooted and based on the ideas of flight, in that kind of era of scientific discovery with the kind of field journal esque illustrations and stuff, which I think by the end informed the color palette. These eggs here, I love that. I think there was even a printout of it on the set, but that's very much the color palette that we landed with for the set for Golden Cage.
I really love that what I'm seeing here is ideas and flow, and that in no way it almost looks like you're not thinking, okay, I'm going to make a set. It's like, okay, I'm opening my mind up to what does this mean? What does flight mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. And I think too, like, you know, in those early conversations, I mean, this is true throughout all of my processes. I really tried my hardest to actually not talk about what the set actually is. Because I think it's so fun to discover that together and to kind of give it time to kind of cook, for lack of a better word. And so some of these initial images, are really just about ideas and thoughts and feelings, versus, some of the more specific things. Even thinking about Althea as like a collector, we really started looking at like, the curiosity cabinets, all of like the different things, Cornell boxes. We looked at, kind of art installations, which this actually looked nothing like the final design. But I think that that's kind of what's exciting about the research process, at least for me, is that you take in all of this research, and it can be research that you're actually going to use or research that makes you feel something, and you kind of take all of it and then sort it out, and kind of together you kind of find what feels like the show that you're working on in the present moment. So that's kind of my favorite part of the research process as a whole.
It's beautiful looking back on it and realizing that all of these images informed without forming, but
Hmm.
but informed.
Yeah, for sure. I think for me, like I look at it and I really definitely, the color palette of this,
Mhm.
like even some of the marbles that were in the jars were like printouts that almost looked like things like this. But even like, these other images, there certainly is kind of this kind of cluttered, eclectic feeling, which
Mhm.
definitely came through. And then of course, like looking at like, you know, abstract ideas for Cage as well. We certainly didn't necessarily do like these mirrored pillars or anything like that. It was all about like how do we create something abstractly versus a bit more literally.
Yeah, I remember when that picture came across my vision, the one on the slide before, the
Hmm.
one in the middle, which we can't see too well, but it literally is a cage made out of feathers. And I
Yeah.
remember seeing that and just being like, "Whoa, okay." Yeah, and then the mountain, informing, and I see the isolation of the woman in the cage. So many different things, and then on the right, no cage at all, and yet it's a cage. And
Hmm.
and I'm seeing that house, the illusion of something.
Hmm.
It's so beautiful to just see all of this, and
Yeah,
to see how open you create your creative process.
for sure, for sure. It's also really, I think it's exciting to look back on. I was flipping through this, the past few days, and then right before, we started chatting, and it's interesting because even though, um, we didn't necessarily do one of these specific things, there's definitely is a feeling that you walk away from and you say, oh yeah, I still captured that, even though we didn't necessarily literally do that image. It's all a journey, and I think it's a really exciting.
Well, yeah, and having seen the set, which people can see again at goldencagemusical.com, and now looking at these again, I'm seeing that there are elements of every single one of these things
Mhm.
in the design that you ended up making. And
Yep.
so it's really kind of giving me chills because um, since by keeping it just in the creative realm, all all the parts of these things can work on each other.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, for sure. It's kind of like you're making soup or like a really good milkshake, and you just kind of have to figure out what the right ingredients are and what the right amount of the ingredients are.
Right, and keep tasting it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you have any of the later designs? I forgot to ask you about that. Do you have anything that of what it actually ended up looking like?
Um I have the rendering, which let me try to pull this over from my other
Okay.
screen.
Oh,
Um are you seeing this?
yes, yes, this is great.
Yeah, this is I think the last iteration, sketch that we came to before we started the rest of the production process.
Mhm.
Where you can kind of see the feather perimeter cage, and as well as like a little bit of the kind of other overall container set that we use for the rest of the productions.
Yeah, and it's so one of the things that I found very interesting is that in a sense it's a very sort of not pristine, but like there was nothing warm about the what the set was put onto. It was very almost industrial. It was just this thing.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and a lot of that was all of course super deliberate. We were
Yep.
dealing with six musicals and one play, which
Mhm.
all had completely different periods, completely different ideas. Yours, of course, was this beautiful, fun, fairy tale of a world, but then we had very hard and real worlds. My co-designer Richard and we knew that we the set container or shell as we were calling it for across the board for all of the pieces had to be the most neutral simple thing ever, so that it didn't adhere to one period or another, and it could really transform with light and projection and with how we were able to dress and add to it to create the worlds for the different productions.
Yeah, and it was exciting, and it was exciting also once the projections got on there as well, and I can see that there's the projection of that mountain that we just saw on in your design or something very much like it.
Yeah, I think it is that research image. I think this is also a good example too, to even talk about like how things can change from the sketch to reality. Because at the time that I created this sketch, I was just, I obviously there needs to be a mountain. We were envisioning, the container of the piece, representing the cliffs and the mountain. Um, and I just threw something in here that felt right in the moment. And then when we landed with a projection designer, they created
Mm.
all of these, hand drawn illustrations that felt even more right for the piece. And so you can even see just from these production photos and the sketch how much we grew even then.
And then once in the film, um, you don't even see the shell necessarily.
Hmm.
You're immediately into the world.
For sure, yeah. I mean, film definitely is a different medium,
Mhm.
because it's a lot more closer. Whereas with theater and stuff like this, you're the scenic designer. You're really thinking about the big picture, for every single moment versus like all the different close-ups and stuff like that.
Right. But it worked amazingly well. And Connie's saying, I loved the feather bars and the feather in flight. She's talking about how we were trying to figure out how to solve that problem that a feather flies from him to her. And
Yeah,
it was finally solved in the projections, which was great.
yeah. That was super fun. And I
Yeah.
think, so, being able to play with them, I think was really exciting. Rebecca and I have worked together a lot. And so she's kind of like, if you give a mouse a cookie, she's gonna use, if you give her, X thing, she's gonna use X thing as many ways as she possibly can. And so of course, like, the feather cage was really exciting, because of course by the end they all ended up on the floor, and it was, a fun staging moment, and storytelling moment for the piece.
Yes, yes. And Connie's also saying, and the feather, the feather bars also gave the mental image of the cage being melted away and
Mm,
replaced with other ideas.
yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, it's also like, I think, if you talk about like a challenging part to designing this show, it's, well, how do you do the cage? Because I think once you figure that out, once you unlock that, it helps unlock other things, because it needs to be malleable for the staging in order to tell a story. And so just kind of going through that process and thinking about what it could be, or whatever, and how you might solve that moment, is of course really exciting.
Were there specific lines in the show that helped you or stymied you?
Hmm. I think I wouldn't say. Uh, I think thinking about what the objects were was
Mm,
really important. We, in terms of just like how we represented them, you know, in the early, parts of this design process, they were a lot more physical objects, like real objects that we added in the set. Um, and we kind of, I remember there being a point where I think even you mentioned something about them, and Rebecca and I started talking. Because we before had like, I couldn't even tell you, but we had so many like real things.
uh-huh.
It's a very specific part of the story that nothing is real, or it's
Mhm.
something. And so, for instance, like the sword that she fights with, could be like cardboard and foil. It could be,
Mhm.
something obviously very fake. The jars of like marbles and things that she might collect could literally be like printouts of those like scientific,
Right.
journal illustrations. So it was, I think that part of the process, was really exciting for us to kind of think about how we could make things real but not real. I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, I mean, it's great because, it kind of parallels when I'm writing it, in my questions about it, what's real and what's not real from the very beginning. It's so interesting to me that these same questions come up over and over and over again and get addressed in different ways by the different designers or the different whoever, and the different actors. And
Hmm.
it was really interesting. I remember when Rebecca had talked about fairy tale from the beginning, and I was like, "Well, I don't. Is it? I don't. It's a not a. There's no fairies. I don't know. Or there's a fairy." And then as and then I became more and more and more convinced. And certainly once the reviews started talking about its fairy taleness,
Hmm.
I realized that, and it was really powerful. I remember her talking to the projectionists and describing what she wanted, how she wanted it to look, that she wanted it to look like these fairy tale books, certain fairy tale books at a certain time.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, and that was, I think, for me, something that was really exciting just to see, because I mean, all of the projection work, was super fabulous, and it's all hand drawn. Like, all of this is, I think most of it is hand drawn. There might be some things
Oh,
they've
really? I'll bring that back up. So
yeah,
wait a minute, they actually drew this?
like, from what I understand,
Huh.
they might have found some illustrations.
Aha. Can you expand it a little bit more? I I, I don't know if you can.
You mean make
Um,
of it?
just the drawing, and maybe we'll be able to see that one
Yeah,
section.
let me see. I don't know if I can. Does
Oh,
that?
you're doing it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
all of these clouds. All of this is hand drawn illustrations.
Mhm.
They might have been able to find some stuff, but,
Mhm.
they definitely, utilized a lot of hand drawn
That's
things
beautiful.
to
Um,
project.
Connie's asking about something. She says, all the note tags on each object as a memory. When I first saw Boris, I was I was expecting he would have a note on his hat, that even he was an object that
Mhm.
was saved. Can you talk about what made you decide to the Post-it notes?
I'm so glad you asked actually because that was one of the parts that I actually kind of really liked. Because I mean, in the story, it's clear, it's written in, and you certainly described the fact that each object is labeled.
Yep.
Um, it could be like a brass plate. I think in the script and the stage directions, it's like a fancy tag or something.
Yeah,
Um,
almost like a museum, almost something like that.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So, you know, thinking about the character of Althea, I was like, well, she's a writer. Writers, utilize a lot of post-it notes. So, what if the labels for everything are these post-it notes that are kind of just going crazy? And so that's kind of like how the post-it notes became a part of the design. They were on everything. And it was again kind of something that was really playful.
Hmm.
By nature, but it was also something that she could really pick up and look at and examine, and put back.
Right, and she could like prove something. Like you can't. It is proof that this is silver because it says silver on it, and
Yeah.
yet you see it's just a Post-it note. And somebody commented on it. They said, "I really love those." He said, "It's almost like you realize." She's in this cage in the middle of nowhere. She has a pile of Post-it notes, and this is what she decides to do with it.
Hmm.
And it was just fun to think about that was her decision. Now it looks like you have some other pictures. Do you? Can we look at them?
Yeah. I mean, these are all on my website. I'm sure you've seen them as well. These are just various production photos. This is during the incantation moment, where the world really shifted, where Boris was trying to tell Althea how to get out of her predicament.
Uh-huh.
Um,
You know what? I don't have these photos, and I would love to. They're great because they really show the environment. And now that we're opening up, for licensing to other theater companies, just seeing the film doesn't give them this perspective, which is great.
yeah, I mean, I think if photos in what we do is always really interesting topic because of, as I mentioned, like scenic designers, we're thinking about the entire composition or the full
Mhm.
picture with everything kind of zoomed out, whereas like a costume designer or even actor
Mhm.
uh, is focused on something a bit closer. So um, it's definitely super helpful to kind of see the bigger picture.
Yeah, can we go back to the one just before this?
Uh,
This is great. So this is really marvelous. I mean, I didn't even realize I saw this in the film, and I thought that in the film they had created this lighting effect, but you created it. I mean, you created it together with the lighting designer.
for what specifically?
Well, the isolation, the absolute isolation that is here.
Yes, yeah, for sure. I mean, it's definitely a lot of lighting and projection work, where you see, the sky and clouds and everything, where, I think this is the moment where Boris realizes that everything is not what it seemed and that the grass wasn't necessarily always greener on the other side. Um,
Mhm.
so, there's a lot of projection and light work storytelling going on here to kind of show that, um, the reduction of the beautiful sky and cloud.
Mm. Yeah, it's so powerful, and I haven't seen these because I've been looking at the film version, so
Hmm.
you don't see just how much you created with this simple stage.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, and that was definitely a lot of the intention, of course, too, with the design not only of Golden Cage, but with the entire series as well. We wanted to make sure that we designed something neutral and flexible enough so that it
Mhm.
transform, in a lot of different ways to tell each of the stories.
That's amazing. And Connie saying the lighting was amazing when Althea had to fall off the cliff. Her movements and lighting really made it look like she was falling. That was
Yeah.
another I'm curious. I mean, I was wondering, how are they going to do this? How is this going to happen?
Hmm.
Were there discussions about that?
There were, yeah. I mean, Rebecca and I, it's interesting because as a scenic designer, you know, we kind of, I wouldn't say are in charge, but like we certainly have a hand in how something might be staged. Um,
Hmm.
and so it's always really a really exciting opportunity to talk about you know what that could mean, and I remember Rebecca and I saying like, oh, it's something stylized, there's some kind of stylized movement, but exactly what that was something that was discovered later on in the process. We kind of planted that seed of, we think that it's this, we know that it could be this, but then of course that grew through conversations with lighting or even in the rehearsal room, as well. So, it's just, again, I think it's a great testament to the beauty of collaboration in our field.
Yeah, and I'm thinking about the moment that happens right after here, and you probably don't have an image of that, but it's absolutely chilling. And you use this, a very functional element of the set to create this sense of finalization and disappearing, and someone, you know, disappearing off the edge of the earth.
Hmm.
And I don't know if you've heard the film version, but we spent a year orchestrating it. And so this whole thing is now orchestrated with sounds, so there's yet another level of collaboration.
Oh,
It's,
wonderful. That's great.
yes, it's been amazing to watch that. Yeah, show more.
I'm not sure how many other ones
Oh,
I have. Of
wow.
course, this is the moment, of course, where Boris pushes Althea and she falls, and you can see, there's a lot of staging and movement, and then lights and the projections are, going kind of haywire and playing. And then this is the moment after, I think, where
Mm,
she falls, and she kind of stylistically falls backwards,
mhm.
shuts the panels behind her as she goes.
It's beautiful.
Um, and oh, this is the end where she reappears with wings, which I always just really loved. I thought it was a really sweet ending.
Yeah, yeah. I love that ending. Connie's asking now Tyler is the scenic designer and not the costume designer, Connie. So but she's asking, how did you decide on their costume, red flannels and Boris being all tattered? And I know you didn't decide that. Did you guys talk about it? Did you talk about how the costumes would fit in the set? I mean, this was all happening so fast and in the middle of the end of COVID and people getting COVID, and you were doing 5 different shows, and it was pretty intense. I'm amazed that you were able to talk about any of this.
Yeah, yeah. We certainly did talk about it. It's interesting, looking back and thinking back on the process. I felt like that there was a wonderful sense of collaboration between all of the different design areas. Because like I said before, like I think Evan mentioned, the mechanics of flight, and that inspired me, to look at the research images of the
Mhm.
scientific drawings and stuff like this. And there's certainly, even within this, we felt that it was kind of like this patched together
Mhm.
a world of various things and objects. So I think like what he was mentioning and I was mentioning, we were all talking about in meetings, suddenly clicked in a lot of different ways that kind of came out with what his design, of course, was as well.
Mhm.
It's
Yeah, and that's really
awesome.
great because I wondered, I mean, when I saw the costumes, which we're not gonna see right now, I wondered what I mean, I love them, and they had this area, areanata, it's kind of like, what do you call it? Those guys with the feathers on their heads in the ancient Egypt or something like that. Anyway,
Yeah,
they
yeah.
had the gladiators or something,
Hmm.
but they're partly gladiator, partly aviator, and just absolutely marvelous. And I mean, everything just fits together. It's like and the fact that it was so feathered and yet so unreal and yet so, there's it's like a kid with a cape on
Yeah.
the one hand, and that and it's like post-it notes, kid with a cape. It's just there's that silliness. And the same with the music. There's music like "Oh Pucarini, Give Me a Sign," which is just completely ridiculous, and then there's really the profound moments. And I think that that both the set and the costumes and the lighting captured all of that as well.
For sure, yeah. I mean, I think, and that's what I think was one of the most enjoyable parts of this design was the playfulness of the story, and
Mm.
and what that meant on stage. Like at the end of the day, we as designers and artists are, ultimately trying to tell a story, and so obviously what we do has to support that and feel like that, and not just kind of be our own thing that feels alien or foreign to that. So, finding the playful moments, in this design was, really a lot of fun.
I'd love to see more pictures in it, but I suddenly have this question, so I'm going to take the pictures off for a second, bring you on.
Oh, sure. Here, let me just get
Okay.
back to you.
Oh, okay. We see. I see you now. I. Oh, you don't have to get rid of it. I can actually bring you back without you having to get rid
Oh,
of it. I know. I have control it all. So if you'd had an extra $100,000, what would you have done differently, or would you have done anything differently?
oh my God, that's a very interesting question. Because part of what we do is ephemeral, and it's all based on the moment that you're in. It's, with the conditions, the time, the money, the people, all of that.
Mhm.
And oh goodness, I really loved the playfulness that we all came to, with with the design, with like the feather cage. I don't know if I would want the feather cage to go away.
I know. I mean, it's
Get
hard for me to
bigger
remember.
or like more, you know. We were also doing this as part of a festival, so and like a series of other works. So that of course really informed, a lot of different things. So maybe the surround could change, like the container that
Oh,
everything.
I see. Interesting. Yeah.
Oh,
I mean, I love that. I mean, I didn't love this, but it was so there was very little time, to put things up or take things down. We, go- I mean, it's like, okay, you got to do this now, and that's how much time you have. But I'm feeling like it added to the creativity.
yeah, yeah, for sure. And I think as artists too, I know people in my life that have said that artists work really well in constraints, really well in boxes, because if you give them everything,
I
then
know, and then they're like, I don't know what to do.
but sometimes creativity can really thrive when you're in situations where you have to be a bit more resourceful or whatever. And yeah, like so I don't know. I love the feathers, and I love where we ended. Like it's hard thinking about what we would do differently. I think too probably, the space that we would be in would also inform that because as scenic designers we're very reactive to the space. So maybe there'd be something interesting about the space that we could be in.
I see.
Um
So you would respond to what was there, and it
yeah,
would have a
like
different, yeah.
like some theaters have like little like balcony, like balconies for the audience and stuff. Various things like that. Some of them are super tiny. Some of them are, you have so much space you don't know what to do with it. So that of course I think would inform everything as well. Or maybe are the audience seated not just on one side proscenium style like this, but are they
Oh,
seated,
right. I
on three
see.
sides or on all sides or on two sides. So there's so many different factors along with just money and budget.
Right, right. That's right, right.
Yeah,
Wow, wow. There's always gonna be some kind of a context one way or the other.
there is. Yeah, and I think that's what's great about what we do. And it's people say it's never the same in that regard because it truly isn't. You never know what you're in for. In terms of just like all of those different things can be completely different every time, or one thing can be wild and be like, oh gosh, I didn't know that we only had, 2 hours to put the setup or whatever. So like there's all of these different constraints that affect where you land. And you do that, you work with them and you work within them, and stretch the boundaries, I guess, of what sandbox you're playing in. But yeah, it's always different.
Well, I'm going to ask you in a second, what you're doing now and what you want us to know. And I'm just curious before I ask you that, is there anything that sort of stayed with you from the Golden Cage, or that just kind of, well, part of it, no, I was going to ask, is there anything you afterwards you were like, oh, darn, I wish I'd thought of that, but I don't want to know about that. I just want to know if anything like, I mean, like, I'm always talking to my therapist about the Golden Cage now, just because of the story and how I feel like it
Long.
reflects. What?
It was with you for so long.
Yeah, yeah. And so much has opened up from actually seeing it happen. And I'm just curious if there's any scene or any part of it that's sort of stayed with you or opened up in a new way, or that you just kind of keep remembering.
Yeah, I mean, I think like, especially looking back on the journey that we went through for the entire piece, from the research to the sketch to the photos of the production, there was just such a sense of collaboration and playfulness that I think that we all tapped into and created together. And that is something that I think, stays with me, is learning how to be playful with the design and with storytelling. Um, and where things don't have to be so rigid, where there's, you can break the rules, or, um, yeah, I think that's probably what's stayed with me the most.
That's really beautiful. That's beautiful. So what are you up to now, and how else can people see your work?
Sure. So people can go to my website to see my work. So that's www.tylerrheralddesign.com. I hope you can link it later for folks. So that's my website. You can also follow me on Instagram _Tyler R. Herald. You'll get all of me, because I have, I think it's really exciting as artists and people to talk about our multifacetedness. So you'll see pictures of me on vacation, but you also see some of my work. You'll really get a sense of who I am. So that's where people can learn more about me. And what am I up to? I just finished two operas, actually, funnily enough, that we're kind of discussing, a very operatic piece, a Rusalka, and a La Traviata. Those were designed at nearly the same time. So it was a lot all at once. It was very rewarding, very exciting. And now that I've just finished those, I am taking a little bit of a mini vacation for myself.
Uh,
So I'm resting, I'm relaxing. I have some fun kind of summer things planned with my friends and family. And yeah, then just looking ahead to the fall for some more exciting things on the horizon.
And this, when we're recording this, this is in Pride Month.
Yeah,
And you had talked a little bit about that. And I'm wondering if you just want to share, because that,
yeah, for sure. I think, now more than ever, it's super timely to talk about supporting, the LGBTQ plus community, with all the over, 400 bills and legislation that have been introduced across the US, that's, really harmful to our community. And even today, I'm not sure if you saw this, but the Human Rights campaign has declared a national state of emergency for the LGBTQ community, just because of all of these, bills that have been passed, as in addition to, a lot of like violent rhetoric and, bullying and harassment that have been happening across the state. So I think, it's really important for everybody to step up, and voice their support for us. We this is an all hands on deck moment, and I know that it can feel really overwhelming in these processes. I certainly feel that once in a while, but it's important to remember that there's something that every single person can do. Even if it's just like speaking it up and saying, "Hey, this isn't really cool," or "I support my friends and family that are in the LGBTQ plus community." There's so many different things that everybody can do, even of just speaking up. It really does make a difference, as well as staying up to date on different things, learning how to be an active bystander, even, looking at your elected officials, contacting them, letting them know how you're feeling about certain things, donating to organizations that are supporting the communities, as well as sharing resources. Today the Human Rights Campaign shared a link. It's hrc.in/resources. And that is a great packet for all of the things that, we're working on right now and that we need help and support with. So I would just say there's tons of things to do, and everybody can get involved at whatever level feels the most comfortable for them.
I love that you're talking about this and then we're also talking about live theater, and we're talking about, um, the environment in which we see it, and that we're all doing it together, and that it's, that it happens within a context, that every story happens within a context. And I think I hear that you're saying there's stories that are happening right now that are as meaningful, certainly, as what we're seeing on stage.
100%. Yeah. I mean, and I remember in being an undergrad studying theater, and there was always like in theater history talking about like the social political world at the time that, X piece of theater, was created. And I think I remember as a younger person being like, what's that even? And it really is so true though, because as artists, we are, holding a mirror up to society. We are informed, of course, every day by the world that we're living in and what we're thinking about. All of these things contribute to who we are as people and our experiences, and they impact us and they come out in our work. That's just kind of part of the process in being an artist. It's just really remarkable.
It's interesting that when you're saying that, because I'm thinking, right. I mean, what we are working on, what we are struggling with, that ends up coming out on stage.
Mhm.
What when we're the designer, especially when we're the designers or the creators, but whoever we are. And I'm thinking about that, and I'm thinking in terms of the Golden Cage. You can see my internal struggle when you see that on stage. When you look at the
Mhm.
stage, you can see these are two sides of this person, and spending a lifetime trying to connect.
Yeah.
And I see that you're saying that, what we see out in the world today is also theater, and it's really personal. I mean, that's, maybe I'm putting those words in your mouth.
No, no, no. I think that's true. And I think what you've done as a writer for this piece is so vulnerable, and beautiful and brave to infuse a little bit of your soul, which I think is going to happen regardless, because as artists, that's just kind of like what we do,
Mhm.
into the piece. It's a beautiful thing, I think, as an artist to be able to do and to have the luxury and ability to do.
Well, thank you, Tyler. It was so wonderful to get to talk to you about this.
Yeah.
And it was live, but we most of our listeners and viewers happen afterwards. So and the link to your website, it's in there, in all the posts, so anybody can see that. Thank you so much. It was wonderful to work with you on the Golden Cage, and it was really wonderful to get to come and talk to you about it. And thanks to everybody who was here and left comments. It was great to have you as part of the conversation. Thank you, and we will continue to unlock the Golden Cage.
Thank you